Hey, everybody, welcome back to the next episode of AI Unleashed. The latest episode is we're returning to something that we have discussed a couple of times, which is the role of AI in learning and development, corporate learning, and how we make sure that our workforces have the skills that they need to achieve the business value that is required of them. So that's broadly what the learning function does. And today I have the pleasure of being joined by Ian Walker, who has many years, I think 20 years, working in L&D in tech-focused organizations. So Ian, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ashwin. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you on, I think, what is a topic which is going to be transformational in the next few years. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ian. So let's start on that transformational note. So we've had 3, 4, 5 years almost, no, 4 years, I think, of the AI revolution where not only learning departments, but companies generally and society at large has been grappling with the latest and newest technology and figuring out how we can mobilize the tech while also maximizing human capability. What are you seeing as the big things in this space? How are departments coping with this? How are people coping with this? What are the big challenges? What are the trends that you see?
Yeah, it's a really complex question and an important question. I went to an event yesterday with about just under 100 practitioners from L&D, and the final question which someone asked from the floor was, are L&D departments and practitioners like ourselves taking seriously enough the challenges ahead of us in terms of what's happening with AI? And are we actually leading the way sufficiently in terms of adapting? And I think it's an existential question, honestly. I think the answer, sadly, is no in general. I think there are teams and organizations where there is leadership being shown and there is transformation happening. But I think broadly, companies are lagging, certainly governments lagging, companies are lagging, and organizations are lagging. And I think L&D is lagging in this respect as well. And I think it's due to a number of different things, which is also linked to why organizations are lagging and primarily driven by fear for jobs, fear for what we've done up until now, knowing that what got us here won't get us there, and all the things which we've been famous for and which we're known for and which we've devoted the last however many years of our lives to creating, that's fundamentally changing. So when moving from being practitioners where we are the knowledge holders and we're known for that authority of knowing how to develop and how to design and how to then deliver content, to having to hand over a lot of that knowledge and agency to this thing called AI, and to share, because I do think it's a sharing with AI, the future in terms of how we both develop and deliver learning within the enterprise. So I think it's depending which way you look at it, it's a scary place or an exciting place, or it's polarity. It's probably both. So I think that L&D as a profession needs to react to this accelerated digitalization. Otherwise, we face losing our relevance. And I think so the kind of changes which I would love L&D to undertake is really being focused on organizationally what's happening within your organization, which requires a change in terms of what learning can bring. It needs to be outcome focused. It needs to be focused on enabling the organization to be successful. It needs to be data driven. We need to focus on things like, how are we supporting revenue? How are we supporting productivity? How are we supporting the evolution of skills, or revolution of skills, you could say, given in some organizations the impact of agentic AI. So it's a really profound shift which organizations are undergoing, and we need to be actually ahead of that. And I feel that we're lagging. So that's a lengthy answer, but I hope kind of frame some of the future discussion that we will have on this.
So, I mean, there are a bunch of questions that arise from what you just said. And one of those questions, I think, is, as you rightly said, L&D departments historically have been very focused on making content. And there is a certain amount of expertise around things like instructional design or media design, or even e-learning development or course structuring, or at best, maybe pedagogic design. All of these things in 20 years ago maybe were relevant, because we had the luxury of time around how we structure learning interventions. And just to be clear, we're talking about learning interventions. So there may be digital, there may be non-digital, but they're still interventions. We expect a delta to happen as a result of the intervention. And the skills related to all of that are potentially less relevant, even if we say, well, we're going to use AI for some of the design, we're going to use AI for some of the development, we're going to use AI for media creation, content scripting, curriculum structuring, whatever it happens to be. In a world where you as a learner, as an employee, can just go to a browser, doesn't matter what's in the browser, you can go to a browser and just ask a question and get pretty much an answer. To what degree do we actually need learning interventions?
That is the fundamental question, right? And that I think is what is scaring a lot of L&D professionals, because to your point, essentially learning has become democratized from that point of view. You can go into ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, help me become better at X, Y, or Z, and it will help you to become better. You can go to Slackbot and say, Slackbot, look through my meetings for the last 2 weeks and tell me what I should have done differently and better, right? Slackbot, help me to become better at giving and receiving feedback. You can imagine pretty much anything you can now hand over to AI, and it will give you some learning. Now the question is, and this is kind of at the root of what you're saying, is what is learning all about, and particularly in the area that I kind of focus on, which is leadership development. Is that adequate, and will that be adequate to take a leader behaving perhaps not optimally here to behaving optimally as a leader over here? And I would say that the AI can help with part of that journey, and I think certainly some of the what of leadership I think it can help with. But I think two things where it's not yet there is more of the how, in terms of particularly elevating leaders to move from being more junior to more senior, helping them. I think there's a lot of human knowledge in that, which happens through observation and which happens through working together with others. There's a lot of, the 70-20-10 rule. There's a lot of the 70% happening there, where you learn over time by observation, by trial and error, which can be accelerated with AI support, but I think needs that human to human observation and practical experience. I think the other aspect, particularly from a leadership development point of view, is that because the future is so uncertain, when we're looking ahead at how organizations are developing and how business plans are folding out, that you can put together a business plan now in January, and it won't survive the next 12 months because of the speed of change which is happening, particularly in tech. Good example was Salesforce started out with a business plan beginning 2 years ago, and within 6 months that had radically shifted to almost a company changing its name to Agentforce because of the implementation and the decision to completely pivot to agents. In that environment, where you've got leaders who are facing such profound change so quickly, you've got to come together in order to talk about, okay, what is the impact of this, and how do we then react to this and respond to this? From a leadership development point of view, we have to then also be working with them, coaching them and supporting them through that process. Again, AI can help that, particularly when you're thinking about planning tools, etc. But I think the human to human engagement of learning is still very relevant. And I also think it would be dangerous to have people in isolation going through learning experiences, because then you end up with a fragmented framework, which could be okay, but also could, I think, be dangerous.
So let me challenge a couple of things there to stimulate some discussion, of course.
Absolutely.
Right? So if now we have the reliance on human to human interaction. So we have this kind of the 2 sigma problem and all of these things. But if we drill into what we're actually trying to do, forget whether it's person to person or machine to person, right? We just let's think about what we're trying to do. What we're hopefully trying to do is have people who are hungry, ambitious, charismatic. They have vision, they have direction. They are going to execute some behaviors. And what we want to do is give feedback on those behaviors that are outside the scope of the organization and apply corrective pressure to make sure that in future behaviors are in line with the scope of the organization. And when I've broken it down like that, it seems to me that it really doesn't matter whether it's person to person or whether it's person to machine interactions that do that behavioral nudging. So the reason I position it like that is that with L&D teams, I work a lot with L&D teams and I do a lot in the L&D industry. And nearly always I find that folks I basically split the industry into people who are tech literate and people who are not tech literate. And I don't know you well enough to say which camp you're in, but what I usually find is that folks who are a bit more on the people side are on the people side because they advocate for people stuff because they don't understand the tech, and vice versa, right? You have people who are in the tech space and they don't understand the people side, and therefore they always advocate for tech. And I try and take a more balanced view that, if we need a human interaction because of the thing that we're doing, maybe that's efficacious, but it's not the same as saying we need a people interaction and therefore blah, blah, blah. So what's the evidence behind what you're saying? Because what you're saying is we need people interactions because they're important. I don't think they are. I think the behavioral correction is the important thing when it comes to leadership, as well as, of course, selecting the people who have the right attitude, aptitude, values, and capability to be able to go on this journey. All of that stuff is important, irrespective of whether it's human to human or human to machine. What do you think about that?
I think the answer is, as always, it's neither polarity. I think extremes, generally speaking, are not useful. I think you need both. And I think I agree with you that there are absolutely situations where AI and tech is incredibly valuable. I mean, for me, the paradox is that feedback, people are far more likely to accept feedback from a bot than they are from another person, which is kind of like blows your mind, since we are taught to believe that feedback is based on trust, right? And why do you trust a bot more than you do another human being? And I think that's due for a number of different factors, but I think we always assume when people are giving us feedback, unless we trust them incredibly deeply, that there is some kind of agenda at play, right? And yet at the same time, I would also say that coaching, whilst I think there is absolutely a really key place for AI coaching, I think people come to coaching, particularly leaders come to coaching, not just looking for coaching. They're looking for someone who they can interact with, exchange ideas, exchange frustration with, which they can do with a bot, but actually there is an inherent need for that human. We may argue about whether it's a need or my interpretation of a need, but I think there is an inherent need, in my experience, of people wanting to offload onto another human being and have that human to human response. Can that be replaced with AI? Yeah, absolutely, it can be replaced with AI. But I would say that that's not just coaching which is happening there. It's a human to human engagement, which is supporting that person through whatever experience that they're struggling with. And they may well have AI coaching happening in parallel to address particular skills that they want to evolve and develop. But I think that coaching is performing another process. The other thing I would say is that, again, from practical experience of having delivered both AI-driven courses and also human-to-human courses, particularly for senior leaders, is that bringing leaders together and creating cohesion between leadership teams does not happen better through technology. It happens better through human-to-human interaction, whether that be being together and learning together to create a kind of a joint culture, whether it be going out drinking together, eating together, whether, the whole breaking of bread together, whether it be going out hiking up a mountain together. We can argue about those kind of formats, but if you want a team to function more effectively together, and a leadership team in particular, and to create a coherent and consistent culture within an organization, that is better done by bringing them together. You can absolutely leverage AI as part of that learning experience, particularly to concatenate data coming through as part of the development experience and to share that back into the system. But I do think bringing people together to create that learning experience to drive culture more effectively, I think is still better done by people. Longer term, all bets are off. I'm not going to kind of predict whether that will change in the future, but still that feels to me to be. And you asked about data around that. Again, it's just based on my experience and the output which I've seen and the performance improvement I've seen from those.
What you're saying I mean, we need to apply the sniff test to this stuff, right? And it seems perfectly logical that if you've got a bunch of people who need to learn how to cooperate or interact with each other more effectively, then practicing that would seem the way to do it, right? Whether it's around a table or at a bar or with a drink, it doesn't really matter. But practicing those interactions would seem the best way to get those interactions to be more coherent. Now, the reason I position it like that is the next follow-up to that is, of course, that we have the big scary world of agentic upon us for 2026. This is going to be the thing that we will talk about. It's going to be the thing that I talk about. If you're watching this, go on the website, look at the agentic revolution, look at the agentic readiness model. It's all there for you guys to go see. When we start to think about agentic versus AI, AI is a SaaS proposition. So companies that have been doing AI have been putting in basically software as a service and expecting that humans will go and use that software. And they're looking at things like adoption, which are how much humans are actually using the tools that are there. When we think of agentic, we're thinking about different team structures. We're thinking about hybrid workforce, a synthetic workforce. We might be thinking about productivity versus adoption. Some of these things are very different. And it's not only different for the workforce, of course, it's different for leaders as well. So what you've just described is when we have leaders interacting with other leaders, we have a leadership quorum or whatever that looks like, a board, a team structure. Those folks need to be well versed in making decisions together. When we have a hybrid or a synthetic workforce, roles change. How is that affecting the domain of leadership development when it comes to L&D?
Oh gosh, another easy question, Ash. Thanks for that. Another very complex question, because I don't think you can remove it from the bigger systemic changes which are happening, particularly in tech, where you're seeing mass layoffs happening and a lot of fear in the system, which is impacting then on people's own kind of perspective, and that's linked also to bigger fears within society as well, right? I think that there's that playing into the answer to this question. If we kind of narrow down to your point, your question about organizational structures and how is that impacting on L&D, I think the biggest challenge facing organizations today, and I've not seen a large organization address this, and maybe they are out there, is, and there's a lot of talk about it, is that agentic AI will fundamentally change how organizations function. And they will change how organizations are structured. They will break down the pyramidal structure which is currently existing and create teams, a much more fluid team-based structure where teams will come together, including agentic AI representation, and then will break apart when they've dealt with whatever it is that they're addressing, and then they'll reform in different formats and come together again. And that's going to be, I think, how the future of work will evolve. My opinion. And so that has a profound impact then on learning, but also on leadership and how leaders will lead and the role of a leader, because the role of a leader in that model then becomes far more fluid, far more flexible. The leader could come into that and play a particular role for a while. Then they could shift, the role could shift within that context as well. So leaders will have to relearn leadership. And leaders will, we talked about, the commoditization of knowledge. Leaders will cease to be knowledge bearers, if they've ever been knowledge bearers, and we can talk about that as well. They will take a role which is leadership, which is how do I lead within that kind of structure, and how am I comfortable with perhaps playing a leadership role for 6 months in one team and then moving to another team and playing a different role the next 6 months, because I think that's going to be the nature of work as well in the future. So what we know to be true now in terms of organizations is going to radically change. And I agree with you. I think the horizon for that is much sooner than people may wish to believe. I think the challenge is in tech, we're seeing a number of people being laid off before those organizational shifts are taking place. So we're kind of acting a little bit ahead of the curve to kind of maybe create space for those changes. But I don't think anyone's yet, where you call it, brave enough to start experimenting with what those changes should be. What is the impact then of that on learning and development, right? So as learning and development professionals, we need to be incredibly agile, because we need to be putting in place then the capabilities, and I absolutely agree, this is where AI plays an absolutely critical role, to be able to personalize learning not just a journey, but an in the moment, what do I need in the moment from a learning point of view in order to be effective in the next 1 to 6 months, for example. And so that's where transfer of ownership can take place from L&D to the learner. And L&D then is responsible for orchestrating and putting in place the systems and tools which will enable that, rather than saying, hey, I'm an expert on how to do X, Y, or Z, so we're going to make time for training in 3 weeks' time where I'm going to train you how to do this. At the age of that is fully dead in that model. I'll pause there because you probably got 5 questions coming from that.
I've got 2 questions on that. So in context, I'll give some context first. And that is that I think we're all, you and I certainly, but maybe some of the listeners are old enough to remember the Cambridge Analytica kind of scandal, which was about targeted ads and potentially enabling election interference. And that was a social media platform rather than a learning management system or something like that. But the whole concept there was ads could be personalized because of the scale and quality of data that they had about people. They really knew which people to target and not. And that was the advent of the word of personalization. And in the L&D industry, broadly speaking, I hear the word personalization a lot. We're going to personalize learning experiences, etc. But for a discipline that historically has not really collected high quality or volume of data, it surely is very difficult to personalize. What do you think?
It's really interesting. While you were talking, it brought to mind the books of Dave Eggers, the Circle in particular, and the Every, where data is being perpetually captured about an individual through their life. So every aspect of their life is being recorded. And that's what we're now able to do with AI, right? So we're able now to, for example, our discussion is being recorded by AI and is being enabled by AI. Every meeting that I go to, there's an AI bot recording that meeting. If I work in Slack, I can go into Slack and go, hey, Slack, as I say, give me a feedback on what I've done for the last 6 months in terms of Slack messaging or email or meetings, and give me feedback on how I should have done things differently, how I could have done better or whatever. And I've got a summary of that if you want me to share some of the wisdom that came from Slack about how I should be a better leader. So the point being is that L&D may not have a history in that, but hey, L&D is being bypassed by reality. The tools are there, and there is masses and masses and masses of data already being collected about everything that I do within the context of my corporate persona, which I can choose to leverage in order to make myself a better functioning human and leader, or I can choose to go, you know what, I'm not going to be curious about that because I don't want to hear that. But so I think that I absolutely agree with you that historically L&D has not been great with that. But I think that the data now is just so widely available and pervasive and being leveraged through coaching bots and things like Slackbot, which will help us if we're ready to be helped to be better leaders and to provide us with that targeted, personalized learning, which I think is absolutely a game changer.
I agree it's a game changer, but I think where I'm going with this is that we have systemic data collection, which allows systems, technical systems, to provide these nudges based on past data, based on a corpus of data about that particular individual, in a way that's, again, just not really related at all to this thing that we call L&D departments. So we have the concept of learning interventions, which are long-term static interventions. We have the concept of dynamic nudges and dynamic data-driven messaging in the flow of work, which is a thing that systems can now do. We still don't. And I know we have a lot of data collection. You've rightly said that pretty much every system is collecting data on us. But what we don't have is effectively a way to use that data for good. It's all somewhere. Different companies are collecting data for different reasons. But we don't have one central data record about a person, which we could say, you know what, this person needs these things. They're asking for these things. We know based on their data they need these things. Here are those things. So that doesn't matter whether it's learning or marketing or sales or any business function. It really doesn't matter. Generally, we have data. We don't have a way to use that data. And if we did have a way to use that data, I don't see the relevance of that to a learning department at all. So all of that together, and I know it's potentially a very bleak and pointy thing for me to say, but I say bleak and pointy things. So where do we how do we architect the future of a learning department, given that all of the stuff we're talking about could just be done without a department?
Oh, I, I'm not going to argue with you on that point. I absolutely think that L&D, as we said before, I think we're at an existential crossroads at the moment. I still think, though, and again, this is talking about the shifting skills required from learning and development. I talked about the need that we need to become data jockeys as L&D. We need to be able to analyze that data and to be able to come up with recommendations to leadership about this is what we're seeing across the organization. And this is what, from a learning point of view, we see as being a pervasive area of need, which is perpetually coming up. And it looks like the AI mechanisms which we have in place, for example, are not sufficient in terms of moving the needle in terms of behavior change, for example. So therefore, we would recommend this type of intervention. So longer term, I agree with you. I think longer term, AI will become more and more pervasive in this space. But I think for the time being, I do see a role for the human learning and development person, but with the caveat that it's not the one that was successful 5 years ago, unless they radically shift their focus and area. But data is key, and clean data is key. And that's the other thing is making sure that the data that you're working with is accurate. And the other challenge with this, of course, particularly in Europe, is GDPR, right? How much of this data will we be able to access, and will we be able to leverage in order to make decisions and to share more broadly within the wider organization, is also going to be a fundamental question, because I think there's all manner of scrutiny around what AI can do at the moment and what it will be able to do, which will potentially face some kind of governance, maybe some kind of constraint through legal frameworks, etc., in the future as well.
So it's an interesting point, and I've already articulated in this conversation that I have a perspective on AI, which is software as a service, and a perspective on agentic capability, which is slightly different. But if we take the AI space, I probably throughout last year, and I don't think I've much changed my view, I was thinking that between things like information security and ISO 27001 and GDPR, things around data privacy and security are basically taken care of, whether it's an AI system or not. The onus of due diligence is different because we need to think about slightly different things. But the fundamental principles of what we need to safeguard and the duties that we have as employers and the duties that we have as people and the duties that we have as organizations out in society, those things are pretty well laid out. So it's not really a new world. Now, agentic is slightly different, but that's because there's an obfuscation around the data workflows that might happen within some of these new and emerging technologies. So do we really need anything new? We've got the EU AI Act, of course, which talks about risk categorization and other different things that companies who are developing or deploying AI need to go and do. Does that seem like a reasonable regulatory framework? Do we need anything else?
I mean, I think the challenge at the moment, and leaders coming out of Davos were talking about this as well, is that the AI is still not yet sufficiently trustworthy to be able to say the humans out of the loop, right? Now, as you talk to us, you and I are old enough to remember voice over IP. In the beginning of voice over IP, and that was kind of the quality of the voice, right? And the same will happen with AI. That we're at that stage, right, where there's still fragmentation in terms of quality. There's still too much bias in the AI because of the source data which it's relying on. But that will work its way out over time. We're not. But my argument at the moment is, excuse me, is that we're not there yet, and that we still need humans within the loop to make sure that we are not straying into territory that we do not want to be straying into. Now, again, over time, will AI become better and improve? Yes, absolutely. But I don't think we're there yet.
So the human in the loop thing is interesting because human in the loop goes back to what I was saying about companies that are deploying software as a service, AI software as a service, and machine gives a response, human needs to validate that response, basically. Human on the loop or out of the loop are different things. And in an agentic situations, again, 2026, agentic readiness model. Go look at it on my website. If you're watching this and you're interested, of course, go and look at it. So in the agentic space, we might say we have a human in the loop, i.e. the workflow end to end from inputs, throughputs to outputs requires a human being somewhere in there. We have a human on the loop, which is, you might think of the concept of a puppet master. So we have agents, agent squads, orchestration, microservices, all of these things together, supported by data, which are able to take action in a way that's robust and repeatable, but you need a human on the loop that's reviewing and monitoring indicators of outputs. And then we have human out of the loop, just not involved. You've got fully automated and robust processes. All of these things have a very different onus on the human, which is when you just said human in the loop. That takes us down a different avenue of thinking about skills, skill sets, what L&D might need to do, whether L&D is involved or not, how organizations structure, what organizational redesign looks like, what workforce architecture looks like. All of these things become different in this new world, which impacts
100%.
again, back to L&D, impacts what L&D maybe needs to do. But your point about data is very well made, because I think, and I go back and forth on this, which is, do L&D folks need to upskill in data, or we just need a new set of folks who have new skills and aren't encumbered by I used to be an instructional designer and now I design data visualizations in Power BI. It's not the direction of travel. Do you think it's possible to upskill the L&D folks to cope with all of what we just said?
Gosh, I mean, I have to say yes for the sake of my profession, but I would say, as with most transformations, there will be some people who thrive in the new environment, and there are some people who don't thrive in the new environment for precisely the reason that you articulated, I think, at the beginning, where you talked about the different types of people that you see, the more human focused versus the more technology focused. I think. As I said, I think we need to meet somewhere in the middle. I think we need both. It's interesting, and I don't know if this is entirely relevant, but I was talking to a young friend of mine who's just completed his master's at Imperial, and he was talking about a doctoral thesis question which his tutor said one of his students was going to feed through an AI system and see what the outcome would be. And it was a doctoral question which a human would take maybe 6 months to answer. And they fed it into the AI tool, and it took 16 minutes, I think, for the machine to work its through and to come out with an answer. Now, it took that human, the professor, to be able to look at the answer, look through the reasoning in the answer, to be able to go, that is a good answer. But if that person had not been educated up until that point, in order to be able to make that assessment, to be able to judge the output of the AI and go, yes, that's correct, you would not know whether that was a high quality answer or not. So at this stage, and again, I'm saying at this stage, Ash, because I think longer term, all bets are off. At this stage, having humans involved in looking over didactic methodology and looking at learning theory as it relates to what AI is doing and influencing, as well as kind of tying in still some human to human learning. I still think there's a place for that reason, until we can really be sure that all of the learning which is taking place within a system is 100% reliable and trustworthy.
So I both agree and disagree. I think
Of course you do.
you're getting to know me now, right? I think what you're saying about having high performing expertise that can oversee a system and make sure that it's performing to the right level, fully agree with that. The bit I disagree with is, I've worked in a lot of big companies and I've worked with a lot of learning departments, and I wouldn't have put any of those in none of them, maybe one or two, in the category of, this is a professor caliber person who has sufficient knowledge, experience, oversight, scrutiny, all of this stuff, is sufficiently aware of the literature, understands data, understands what the tech is doing, and understands people and pedagogy and behavior. I wouldn't have said there are many of those folks in the industry. The vast majority of folks in the industry tend to have come from a training background, accustomed to doing the organization and administration of training courses, where somebody stands up in front of a classroom, or they're accustomed to managing a learning management system or developing e-learning courses. So those jobs which needed to be done in the past and they needed to be expertise, aren't necessarily the fertile fields upon which expertise grows. So we have the persona that you've described, which I think rightly would need to have oversight. I don't know many folks in the industry who have that persona. So this is why I say I agree and I disagree, because it's a vital role, but I haven't seen it happen. What do you think?
Yeah, no, and it is a provocative statement. I know a large number of people in the industry who come with a behavioral science background, who have, heavily qualified in terms of understanding psychology, behavioral psychology. So whilst I agree with you that practitioners come from a wide variety of background, and I'm one of them. I mean, I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool L&D kind of professional. I have a lot of experience in leadership, which is why I'm passionate about it. But I'm absolutely not a professor. But I do know what good leadership looks like and what bad leadership looks like. But that's a whole different discussion. But I do think that there are an awful lot of well-educated people within the industry, certainly in the leadership development space that I move in, and certainly on the basis of yesterday's discussions, who were talking about data-driven observations, not just kind of, hey, I've seen this in our organization, and so that's therefore true. So as we talked about, a little bit of agreement probably.
That's the richness of discussion. Let's pivot slightly, because we have really talked extensively about the AI revolution, and the agentic revolution, how people fit into that, what the future of learning might look like, how it affects work, how employees might benefit, how organizations need to be structured. We've covered a lot of ground, but we've covered a lot of ground from the perspective of 2025-26, so the recent past and the imminent future. But let's take a slightly longer term trajectory. So if we think about 5 years, nobody has a crystal ball, but do you think the future for L&D, let's focus on L&D. Do you think the future for L&D is utopian, dystopian after they go through this existential crisis? Do you think anything will be left? Will we be left with the remnants of a pedagogic past, or will we be sailing a ship across the sea of learning technology to a new destination? What do you think the future looks like?
I'm going to answer your question slightly deflect the answer by saying that I think all organizations are going to be radically different in 5 years' time than they are now. I think most roles are going to be radically different between where they are now and where they will be in 5 years' time. And I don't think that L&D, I think it would be naive and hubristic for L&D to claim that it was going to be immune from that shift. Long-winded answer by saying, no, I don't think L&D will survive in the current form that it exists at the moment. In fact, if it does, then you're in an industry which is immune to any kind of influence from change, because I think all industries, to greater or lesser degree, will undergo significant change. I think a lot of roles accordingly will undergo significant change. I mean, linked to your point about L&D professionals, to survive, they need to become familiar with data and data analysis. At the moment, that would probably not have, in the last 5 years, probably would not have been top of many L&D professionals' job descriptions. It will be in the future. It will have to be in the future. The point, does that mean that's still an L&D professional, or is it a different role? I think that's a question to answer. I would say what I'm seeing, and certainly in some of the jobs now which are being posted, is that there's a coming together of roles which were traditionally split apart. So you're seeing much more bringing together of talent roles, talent management roles, learning roles into a single role, because you need that cohesion now. And I think AI enables that cohesion much more than it did before. And I think that's reflective of how organizations are beginning to shift and look at the integration between things like performance management and learning, for example, which traditionally may have fallen into different silos within the HR function. And I think that we will see those kind of consolidation of roles, I think, taking place, or certainly of high level responsibility, as that integration continues, and as AI and the quality of data continues to improve about how people perform and behave within organizations. So I think that's going to be a big shift. Yeah, I'll pause there.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that things are going to very structurally change. It's going to be a very different world out there. And how we cope with it is pretty much anybody's guess. But if you're watching this and you're loving every second of it, like I have been, it's been a very interesting conversation. You want to start somewhere, of course, check out Ian's work on LinkedIn. He's primarily on LinkedIn. On our website, methodology.com, we have some papers on things like agentic HR and what the future of workforce architecture looks like. So go and read those things. All of these things, of course, will pan out throughout 26. So keep watching and keep loving what we're doing. Ian, it's been an amazing, I think, almost hour that we've had this discussion. Thank you so much for being here with me
Thank
today.
you. Thank you. A real pleasure.
So for everybody watching, if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're watching this on Spotify, don't forget to follow the channel. You'll see clips coming out on LinkedIn and on Instagram, and Ian's details will be in the captions and in the posts. So feel free to link up with him and connect. Until next time, keep watching.